which are it is said and people say. And it's communicating these like other ideas. So you're saying, by adding that little ma'ak, you're saying, well, it's not me who said this, right? It was her. It was somebody else. You're taking away that responsibility, that commitment, right? Yeah. So speakers are able to, in any given sentence, communicate a lack of certainty or some doubt with the use of these pre-verbal markers, right? So very easily. And so speakers use, I'm positing that speakers use mood to communicate this kind of uncertainty. So when we have these two languages, in your native language, you're like, I want to communicate, I want to be able to communicate that I'm not so sure about that, right? There's no pre-verbal marker in Spanish that I can use to communicate that. So what else could I maybe use? So you search the language of other available features of things that you can maybe borrow. And that's what we get with these conjectural markers. With the subjunctive, right? Because we already have subjunctive that communicates some doubt. So we can just borrow the subjunctive and use it in places that we wouldn't expect to see it in other varieties of Spanish. And I think this is even more evident with the case of lexical conjecture, right? So lexical meaning we're not doing it grammatically, we're doing it with our words, okay? So one thing that you hear all the time in Yucatec Spanish is se dicen, and it's plural, always, se dicen que esa tiendita los venda, right? So you hear that all the time. And so this is really similar to disque, which has been talked about a lot, and you find it all over Latin America, right? I just got 3 examples here: Colombia, Mexico, Ecuador. These all have indigenous languages, by the way, just an observation. So we have this need to mark, right? So one article talks about how the semantic value of this disque could differ, right? So we have a reportative, which has like a dubitative flavor. So if we say disque, what you're doing with that, if it's reportative, is you're going, I mean, I don't know, right? You're kind of removing yourself a little bit. If it has an evidential flavor, and Yucatec Maya doesn't have, well, according to what they know now, it doesn't have an evidential system. And this reports speech or communicates hearsay. Really quickly, an evidential is something that a lot of indigenous languages have, and it marks how you know information. So I can't just say, it's raining, without marking it with some kind of evidential marker. Do I know it because I just saw it raining? Do I know it because, well, you just walked in with a wet umbrella, so I'm guessing it's raining? Or do I know it because I heard it was gonna rain, right? You mark it in different ways. So this isn't present in Yucatec Maya, but this is one use of that disque, right? So that could be a possible explanation for some of the uses of this. So, where I'm taking this, a lot more work needs to be done on conjecturals, evidentials, reportatives in Yucatec Maya, and I'm really excited to get involved in that. So that's one of my next steps. There's one guy that writes on it, one, which means they need a woman, right? So that'll be number 1. And then I have this access to a corpus. So there's a man, Mignovitz, who I mentioned at the very beginning. He does a lot of sociolinguistic data, so he's got a lot of interviews, and he's got this great corpus of Yucatec Spanish. And he was the one that came up to me and said, look, we got to do something on this because se dicen is everywhere. I was like, you're right, it is. And if it's conjectural, we need to work on that. So that kind of collaboration will be another kind of piece of this. So those are the 2 directions that I'm hoping to take it. And I prepared 20 minutes so I could have 10 minutes of questions, and I went 21. So any questions, comments? I'm happy to explain whatever.
Did you also have the discussions or examples with adjectival clauses? Hay un profesor que habla ruso, and they were using the subjunctive even though the person exists. Do you see that as similar?
Yeah, so that is one area that I haven't gotten into. And I would think my intuition would be that there could be, I mean, you would think if there's not a huge difference with some of these pragmatic, there would be a difference between the speakers. One thing that is interesting is a lot of these bilingual speakers, when they go to college, some of the unique mood disappears. Like they kind of learn some more correct mood patterns. But my intuition is you're exactly right, that you wouldn't have that, they would be lacking that alternation. But I don't know.
So it sounds like most of the examples you used were noun clauses, is that right?
Yes, so I only did subordinated subjunctive, so with introducing and then K and then, yeah, just to keep it a little more, I mean, it was really one verb that I did these interviews on, and that was even almost too much. So I also looked at interrogatives, these quantifiers, modals, and the same kind of pattern happened throughout. So, but I only talked about a little bit today. I thought that was the coolest stuff. So, no, thank you, Tracy, that was good.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to think what happens in the brain at not even a split second, like a microsecond. Because if in English, if I say, I know it's raining versus I don't think it's raining versus I doubt it's raining versus do you know if it's raining? It's raining. The brain doesn't have to process as much. In Spanish, or in Yucateco or whatever, those little differences might change the verbal structure after that. And what happens in the brain in this tiny fraction of time to figure that out? Because you're not thinking about conjugating, whereas a second language learner would be.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, what can you say about that? Is there anything?
Oh, I can say very little about that. Yeah, but no, it's very cool. I think that's a really neat concept. And the thing that I think is really neat is that saying something like, it's raining, you kind of feel like incomplete. You know, it's like if you've said something like, las chicas bonita. Like you feel incomplete, like you haven't fully communicated your message because you're missing a piece of this, right? So it is really interesting. I know very little about the brain and how it processes all of this, but I completely agree. Very cool. Yeah, no, it's very cool.
So I'm sorry that I came in late, and I totally missed the part where you talked about, you know, how you had done the research. So were you presenting scenarios to people and they were reacting, this sounds right, that sounds right?
Yeah, so I had, we had like different groups of topics, and so I would give a situation and then I would say a sentence, and they would say yes or no. And then after they said, if they said yes right off the bat, which very rarely happen, well, no, it does happen, but a lot of times people would have really issues with something small, like, well, he wouldn't have gotten a 9.5 on that test because he didn't study, so that's, you know, so it's a lot of conversation with people, and it's really neat because you get the interpretations of, well, do you understand what I mean by this sentence, or is it kind of weird? And people will say things like, no, when you say this, I'm imagining, like my favorite thing that I read was, it was a semantics paper, and it said, the participants said that what they were imagining with this was just a whole pile of human feet. Like, I have no idea what the context was here, but this person was picturing a pile of human feet. And so it's great because you have this conversation with the participants instead of like sitting at a computer and clicking. And a lot, not all, several of my participants were not literate. So it was all oral. There's definitely just a good rule of thumb, doing this as a native speaker of Yucatec Spanish would be a lot better than me going in and doing it. But you gotta do what you gotta do. So yeah, so we read through each of these and kind of discussed meaning and all of that, how that changes.
Yeah, I think that's cool that, you know, the sort of the talk back, because it gives you a richer data set, but I also envision, you know, all sorts of different scenarios where you do have a recording and you play that to somebody and then you ask them about the talk back, because if they're hearing that native speech, then they're concentrating on the message.
Yeah.
And not necessarily the forms.
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So lots of very cool things that I can see.
Yeah.
Move forward.
Oh gosh, yeah, this project could be like,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got some time. Any other questions? Yeah.
So this is not strictly related to what you said, but it's just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
So I've worked with Maya rappers, and it's very interesting because they have bilingual lyrics, but they have appropriated Aztec images in order to not be so Yucatec or whatever, so be more Mexican. So do you see that, well, and this is how it's related to what you said, do you think that there is any relation in the way they change or they smooth out or something like that the features of Yucatec Maya as they go to college or they interact with monolingual Spanish speakers.
Yeah, I think that is definitely happening, and a lot of people have cell phones. A lot of people have access to music videos from all over, and yeah, so it's definitely, I think that idea that we're this cultura yucateca is like this pure, untouched, is just not a thing anymore. And actually, there are very few monolingual Yucatec Maya speakers. If they are there, they're probably over 80. I've met multiple people that were like 112. Like, it is so funny. But they're all in the communities where they're not having to come in contact with Spanish at all. But it's neat because even when you're talking with those speakers, you'll hear pues, bueno, computadora, like words that you recognize because, and it's interesting because it's a debate. Well, what do we do with words like computadora? Because they use that's computadora is how you say it in Maya. And so people are saying, let's reinvent all these words for words that didn't exist when Maya came around, and then other people are like, wait, but it's not like you're code switching. There exists no word for computer, right? No word for light bulb exists in this language, no word for car, right? So we have to borrow them. So it is really interesting because you're seeing what the concept of what Maya is shifting big time. Yeah. Did that answer your question? That was a very winded, okay. Yeah. I don't want to go over. Any other?
You're also making me think about different things about, so interviewing the 112-year-old people that are isolated versus the university students that you were talking about. And then the people that are in more the touristy areas of Cancun and Merida who are in contact with people from all over the world, and how does that shift, because they have to do adaptations, so how does that, create different shifts or different tolerances or different levels of acceptance of all of these kinds of forms?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and it was funny because there were some cases where the bilingual university educated participants were like the harshest, like, no, it has to be correct. I think because they've learned that, so they learn the correct way to do it. Yeah, so it would be really interesting to extend it out to places where people are speaking English as well. Yeah, that would be very cool. And looking at how the Maya is changing too, because it's not, language contact is never just one way, right? It's always, yeah, both ways, both directions. So any other questions on any of the concepts I covered or anything? I had some of my students from Introduction to Linguistics here, so this is so exciting. Yeah. All right, well, thank you guys. I'll go ahead and